Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Spider Man 2, Spider Man Dose. So, so No Way Home, just like the trailer of this, like just came out, and I think a lot of people are just losing their minds, which is perfectly okay because everyone is super excited about what is to come now. And plus, also, it's making me realize, like, not for like trending sake or whatever, but like I really want to finally like start reviewing Spider-Man movies and kind of finishing some up or just start some. I feel like eventually we're going to need to know these movies, especially some of the more maybe not as well received ones that they're just going to try to try to put all together in one bag of things, because I'm assuming there's probably going to be an Electro in our near future. Maybe not. So yeah, so going into No Way Home, I was just like, oh my god, like it's really happening. Freaking like it seems like a fan made film. It just seems unreal. It feels like this wasn't true, that somebody like CGI'd all of this, that it really isn't what it should be. But yeah, like full on just a real legit trailer, and everybody's losing their minds, and rightfully so. So me really like watching that and getting excited about this made me also want to revisit a lot of like Spider-Man like content, go back into like Spider-Man 2s and especially 3s, cuz I actually like Spider-Man 3 even though goofy dancing and all that jazz. Uh but also, like, I haven't even dipped my toes into like Spider-Man Homecoming, amazing Spider-Man movies. Like there's endless possibilities to do a number of things, and so like we're just going to kick right back off with going into Spider-Man 2 that coincidentally already has a showcasing of a certain villain in a new trailer. So yeah, freaking great, right? And plus, it was just good to go back into these Spider-Man films, the original Tobey Maguire ones, just because of how really just epic and how much of a big scale these movies were. It seemed like an opera of a thing when you're watching these things, just because of just the interesting just layout of a lot of these and just how they're all just broken down. So so yeah, Spider-Man 2, a very great movie. Really, I would say that it would probably have to be as good as the first one. I don't know if it would be better, like I would, because we do get quite a few spots where, of course, it's the Spider-Man No More story. So we just kind of have Peter kind of going about his own life and kind of getting away from the whole Spider-Man of things. But we do get some pretty dang good payoffs in this movie also. Some big reveals in this movie. I remember when I originally watched this in theater, uh, because I remember all these kinds of moments, and I kind of remember this one more so than probably the first one, where I'm like, oh my god, they did this reveal? Oh my god, they let this person know? Oh my god, now all these people know in this one scene? Harpering back onto like Spider-Man No Way Home, uh to where like there's so many possibilities in that movie that we still don't know about. So, but like a lot of fun is to be had with this movie. Peter is to desperately try to be this pizza boy, but also be uh this photographer, and he's doing all these kinds of odd jobs to desperately try to either make rent or just try to continue to survive. But yeah, it's this story is so interesting to like have this kind of be like a psyche kind of play out of Peter Parker's character, where eventually he's just like I would give up this suit in a second to eventually go and be with Mary Jane. And that is the huge back and forth battle that is going on with Peter in this movie. Is just like, if I were to give up this suit, even though it's a great power and responsibility, wearing this suit is never going to get me any closer to Mary Jane. And it's kind of funny to say that, because in the first movie, like, Peter was wearing the suit and Mary Jane was like, I'm going to give him a little smooch. Like, in this second movie, it seems that both Mary Jane and Spider-Man are like heavily disconnected. Uh, yeah, of course, we get a spot towards the end there, but still, like, it feels that we don't have a damsel in distress for a bulk of this movie, which is kind of weird to me. But I guess you could say, well, wait a minute. What about that Aunt May? I'm like, well, yeah, a little, but it kind of feels like we don't have that continuous threat of Mary Jane dying by the hands of some goblin-esque character. Uh, which is the kind of interesting thing about the sequel, is like we don't have, like, I don't know how many superhero movies it would be this one girl always in danger throughout the whole entire thing. It feels like we kind of break away from that for the most point. Uh, but then within the third movie, we like kind of go back to that. Kind of. That's a bit of a stretch. Like, we just have like a big action sequence, because really it's just a lot of action sequences to be had between Toby and whoever the villain is, and really we go back into Peter's like story rather than him spending any kind of time really with Mary Jane, because he's kind of mixing it up with Gwen Stacy in the third one. Spoilers. But anyways, yeah. So I just wanted to talk about Spider-Man 2. Here's also a thing that, of course, I remember. Like, Spider-Man 2 also gave us an amazing Spider-Man 2 video game that all of a sudden, like, was the very first showing of me seeing a game that had, like, this open world of a thing. And I'm just like, oh my god, there's, like, so many endless possibilities in this game. Like, you could play, like, forever in this game. And yeah, you would have to deal with this stupid girl who's like, I lost my balloon. But freaking, like, you would get this amazing story, and that continued on into the Spider-Man 3 video game, which is, like, just as good, but also made you want to choose, like, well, what suit are you going to use? The black suit or the red and blue? I'm like, freaking black suit all day long. So let's get into it. Let's go into that double five, because it's otherwise that time again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. I hope I get every name right, because I kind of have this sneaking suspicion that eventually I'm gonna like forget something somewhere, like some name, and I'll feel that I'll desperately need to know that. So very beginning of this movie, besides the obvious like intro opening with the cool artsy designs, which I'm like, man, that's so cool that they give us a big reflection on the first Spider-Man 2 with all these like artsy things going on here. So beginning of movie, Peter is to supposedly deliver a bunch of pizzas because his job is depending on it, because 30-minute guarantee, and so Peter is working at Joe's Pizzas and is to, of course, get this huge large order. So Peter is to realize that it's like, dude, there's no way I'm gonna get there with there's no way I'm gonna get there with this bike. I need to go and do some Spider-Man slinging. So of course we get Spider-Man who's just kind of slinging around. Eventually he stops and drops the pizza somewhere. All of a sudden some guy tries to grab a piece, and so Peter like takes the web and gets it back and just goes to desperately try to make it to this location right in time. Like I remember going and again Spider-Man 2 game where you had to do those silly missions of delivering the pizza, and you had to like do it carefully or otherwise the pizza would slowly start to get ruined. And I'm like, yeah, I remember that. Like that was so much fun. Uh so eventually Peter is to make it into this janitor's closet where he's to consistently move these mops and these brooms and this whatever, making his way to the receptionist who's played by the girl from Bones. Toby slaps the pizzas down and he's like, pizza time. It's like, not right time. Not right time. No, the wrong time. Sorry, you're late. The receptionist is like, I'm not paying for those. Toby is to get his little connecting of the pizza and things and then just walk out of there. Joe or Toby is or Peter is to go back to Joe's pizzas. Joe is like, well, you know what? You're fired. Like, you know what, Peter? Like, I've given you plenty enough chances. There's always an excuse. There's always something. Like, you're fired. And Peter is like, but I need this job. And Joe goes and rips the Joe's Pizza sticker off of Peter's helmet to just, like, really just say, like, you're no longer a worker here. It's not going to happen. And transition us to have Peter now going to the Daily Bugle to try and sell some photos other than Spider-Man, just kind of some scenery shots. And so Jay Jonah is just like, Peter, you're fired. You're gonna lose your pizza job and you're gonna lose my job. Like, you're fired. Like, walk away. And so Peter is to walk off forever and credits are to roll, and like it's a sad film. Jay Jonah is like, dude, I don't pay you to take these photos. Like, I pay you to take pictures of Spider-Man. Give me some of them Spider-Man photos. Robbie is coming in. It's like, Jonah, we need page 1. And so J. Jonah Jameson is just like, well, like, how about you just toss out a picture of a chicken and talk about like food poisoning, and all of a sudden we have one guy coming in and like, some guy's food got poisoned. It's like, yeah, I'm kind of feeling a little sick right now. so, uh, so Peter goes and gives J. Jonah Jameson the picture of Spider-Man, and of course J. Jonah gives this picture to Robbie and says like, hey, like, I think he like says some horrible things of about Spider-Man, where it's always like hero or menace or or some kind of like horrible thing. Peter mentioned to J. Jonah Jameson that Spider-Man didn't want Peter taking pictures of him anymore. So, but of course, just Spider-Man just lied, so that way J. Jonah would forcibly have to have him do some kind of other photos, but not going to quite work out. So Peter gets the photo, and so J. Jonah Jameson is to be haggling over the price of this photo. Peter says $300. J. Jonah Jameson is like, good, great, fine. Give that to Miss Brandt, and she'll take care of you. I hope it's Brandt or Miss. Yeah, I'm gonna say words wrong, our names incorrectly, so I apologize. Peter goes out to Miss Brandt. Miss Brandt is to mention that this $300 doesn't cover the advance that he had gotten on the last picture, and Peter's like, oh crap, that's right. So transition to now Peter desperately trying to go to class. Eventually, he is to have his stuff kind of fall over. People are smacking him with backpacks. One of them is Sam Raimi, because bloopers would tell you that. So, when Peter is to collect all his stuff, all of a sudden, Peter is to bump into Dr. Connors, and Peter is like, hey, Dr. Connors, I was coming to your class. And Dr. Connors is like, well, it's a little late for that, because, like, class is over. Like, can't you see me here? like, doesn't that give you a hint or a clue that class is over? And Peter is like, I'm sorry, Dr. Connors, I'm trying. It's like, well, try harder, Peter. Like, he like, Dr. Connors mentions that, like, that Peter is to always, like, his grades are slipping and he always looks exhausted, and Dr. Connors is still waiting for that paper of Dr. Octavius from Peter. And Peter's like, yeah, and I'll give you that paper. And Dr. Connors is like, well, you better, because, like, Dr. Connors is a friend of mine. Or Dr. Octopus, or Dr. Octavius is a friend of mine. If you guys watch the bloopers, we have weirdly Dr. Connors, who is to mess up on his line and to mention that, like, Dr. Octavius is a friend of mine. It has this, like, weird delivery to it. So, transition us to have Peter going to Aunt May's, because technically Peter is to live in his other apartment. So Peter is to make his way to Aunt May's because technically it's his birthday, but I guess Peter is to not realize that both Harry and Mary Jane are going to be at Peter's birthday party. Peter is to mention that he's been busy, and Harry is just like, oh, like, you taking pictures of Spider-Man? you taking pictures of your friend? You knew who he was, would you tell me, Peter? And Peter Parker goes, yes, because it's me. And Harry's like, wow, we're real too soon. It's a joke. It's a gaffe. It's a geef. Anyways, it's a fun moment. So Harry is, so Peter is to have this birthday party. Mary Jane is like talking about her play because Peter is to mention that he saw her billboard. Mary Jane is like, oh, that thing, and it's like, hey, like, be proud about that. Like, you worked hard to get there. So, eventually, Harry is to quite easily have Peter go on and talk to Otto Octavius, because it seems that Peter needs to desperately try to write this paper, and so that leads to like Harry kind of working his legwork to try to get Harry uh, to meet Otto Octavius, even though like they're kind of at this like this hard part in the relationship between both Harry and Peter. Because it's kind of just a weird scene where we transition from that birthday party where Harry used to be like, if you knew who Spider-Man like would be, like you would tell me, right? Uh, Also, we have Peter who is starting to notice when he is to be in Aunt May's home that she is to see this notice of foreclosure. Aunt May is to try to give Harry $20 and just say, "Hey, like you keep that, like, and don't you try to leave it here. Like I'll know. Like I have uh the eyes of a rodent and the nose of a whatever that Mr. Dickovich or whatever his name is to say in this movie." Anyways, so uh, I think we also get a scene where Peter was to also take out the trash and talk to Mary Jane. And there's this spot where Mary Jane was saying that it's kind of nice to see nice to see Peter, and Peter's like, "Oh boy, yeah." Like the weird, like there's some kind of strange deliveries in this movie at some points. Uh, but anyways, so like pushing on, because I feel like that part like isn't like there isn't a good enough grasp of. Anyways, so Peter is going with Dr. Octavius, and Dr. Octavius is explaining his experiment to Parker, really going in depth about it. And but Dr. Octavius is to say that like he's really busy right now, and like Harry was to just be like, hey, like freaking just like have like both of you heads just combine and just figure things out here. Because when Octavius is to explain his experiment, Peter is to really just understand it, but to also just kind of be like, well, like, are you quite sure that your calculations are correct? And Dr. Octavius is like, dude, what have we been explaining? What have I been explaining to you? Like, I know what I'm doing. Like, sure you will, Octavius. Sure you will. uh, so Peter and Octavius are talking with Octavius's wife. So, God, what is her name in this movie? Rosalie Octavius. Rosalie. They don't really ever. I don't think they actually say that, so that's good that I actually figured that out. So really Octavius is talking about the backstory of him and his wife, how he went to school and like he needed help trying to explain T.S. Eliot to him, and Octavius I think turned around and helped Rosalie with her like maybe her chemistries or something like that. And but Octavius could never understand T.S. Eliot. Uh, Rosalie is talking to Octavius about getting some sleep. Octavius to mention, like, well, hey, did like all of these famous people like sleep before they invented their greatest thing ever? And Peter is to kind of back him up on that. And Octavius is like, oh, I love this kid. Uh, but that all leads like the whole dialogue about Octavius and Rosalie is to lead Octavius asking Peter about like, well, hey, like, So do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a boyfriend? Do you have someone? Peter's like, yeah, I don't really know. Like so Octavius is like, shouldn't you know? like, like how can you not figure that out? Uh, and so Rosalie is like, well, maybe it's a secret love, and Octavius is like, love should never be a secret. It'll make you sick. So Octavius is like, well, there's only one thing that could probably work, and that could be reading poetry. It obviously worked for Octavius, so it'll probably work for Peter. So Peter goes on to try and go to this local laundromat where he is to try and clean his Spider-Man outfit, but with that, he also is gonna like I think bleach like half of his other clothes. Uh, but he's also reading poetry. Like day by day, he sat beside her. Day by day, he thrived with passion, or some goofy thing like that. Uh, like talking about the sunshine and all these like goofy poetic things. But moving on. So uh, Harry. Why do I keep wanting to say Harry? Peter also wanted to tell uh or blah. Peter wanted to promise Mary Jane that he was going to make it to one of her showings, because Mary Jane was to mention there had been a number of people that had gone to this showing. Like she mentioned that Harry had gone to the showing. Her like her father had gone to the showing and just requested money, and all kinds of things. All kinds of people were to consistently like go to the showing besides her best friend Peter. And so that's when Peter was to just say like, okay, I'll make it to one of these showings. So Mary Jane is to give a ticket for Peter to show up at this play. And so now Peter actually has to make it to this play now. Uh, uh, so Peter is to eventually try to make it to this play, but eventually there is just a robbery that has taken place that is to force Peter to make it late to the play. All of a sudden, there's this setup of these robbers that are in this car. Peter is to be on his motorcycle. This car is driving too quickly. Peter flings over the motorcycle uh, to eventually drop behind the car, and kids are like, "Oh my God, how did you do that?" And Peter Parker's like, "Well, I just ate my vegetables." Like the kids are like, "Man, like my mom tells me that all the time, but I never believed her." So Peter gets in his Spider-Man suit, tries to take down this car, and then tries to make it to the play, but sadly enough, he's too late. We have Bruce Campbell, who is the usher, that is to just be like, hey, wait a minute, fix your tie. Peter's like, hey, I have a ticket, and Bruce Campbell is like, great. Sadly enough, you're not going to get in the play because you came too late. Peter Parker's to mention that it's like, well, but like my friend is in this play. And Bruce Campbell's like, well, your friend would have wanted you to not come late then. Like, just like this rigmarole of just so Peter tries to eventually wait to the very end of the play while hearing some song of Spider-Man, which of course he's just like okay, like that did sound good at first, but then eventually this woman like took it to a whole nother journey. Mary Jane is to eventually make that out of the play. Peter is to think that, oh well, like I should go and like at least try to say like, hey, here I made it. Like even though I'm extremely late and I didn't make it to your play whatsoever, because like the doors were to be closed to keep the illusion of the play and whatever. So, but Peter was to realize that Mary Jane was to be grabbed by J. Jonah Jameson Jr. to go out and eat somewhere, and Peter's like, oh, like she's with someone. Like, like this all over again. Peter has to figure out a way to get Mary Jane all over again. If it wasn't Flash for the first movie, now it's J. Jonah Jameson Jr. So oh, we also had the spot where Peter was trying to like web up, and he ends up like falling, and he ends up being pretty high, and he ends up like shooting his web. He ends up falling onto some rooftop, forcing him to have to take the elevator down so that way he can get out of there. We have the one guy asking, it's like, hey, like, cool Spidey suit, like who made it for you? And Peter was like, well, I made it myself. The guy was like, looks uncomfortable. It's like, well, yeah, it does right up in the crotch a little bit. Where the guy is just taking a step aside to just be like, and Peter should have been like, why did you just do that? Like, come closer. Man, but that would have been funny to just make like this guy like really uncomfortable, even much more so than he was. Because he just stepped aside once. And I'm just like, no, you're not going to do that with Spider-Man. You're not going to pull that out. So Peter later on is to call Mary Jane, leaving her a message, whispering sweet nothings into the phone. I'm going to have to pause here for a second. Let me do a reset. All right. Peter is to call Mary Jane, and he doesn't have enough money to continue the call, but Peter is to tell Mary Jane that, hey, like I did make it to the play, and I'm sorry that this might have felt like I disappointed you or whatever. And like Mary Jane is listening to this because coincidentally she got home at the right time. What a coincidence, right? But Mary Jane is not going to pick up the phone, but Mary Jane is just going to consistently just heckle Peter while he's to do this whole message. You would have thought that Mary Jane would have just picked up the phone and then just about like, you know what, like, you're a piece of like, you would have thought that she would actually, everything that she was going to say, that she would have just said it. Like, you would have thought that would have been like one thing for maybe Peter to just go like, oh, okay, like, so I really did hurt her feelings and I didn't realize that. But like Spider-Man things. Peter is to mention that Mary Jane might not realize how difficult it is to be at a certain place at a certain time. And he also is to mention about the fact that usher, somebody needs to go and just do something with that usher. But phone call is to end, so Peter is just like I wish I could have really just like said like something like so good that Mary Jane will just win me back, or I wish I could have just told her everything. And so Peter is to just take this phone that is now dead, and Peter is to mention like fine, I'll just do it right now. Like, I'll just pretend that I'm doing it. So Peter is to tell Mary Jane, it's like, well, the real reason that I couldn't make it to the play is because I'm Spider-Man. Cool, right? But you know why I can't tell, like, you know why I can't tell you, or I can't, I could have told you the secret, because if my enemies knew, like, and they would find, like, I can't protect you. And you know what would have been really funny at this moment in time? To all of a sudden have just some random person that is just overhearing this conversation because public place with phone. Like, it would have been funny if someone else would have got onto the phone and then just would have been like, what? Like, this guy is Spider-Man? Flip, buddy, flip. That would have been funny to all of a sudden, like, hey, like, I'm going to take a photo of this guy and, like, I'm going to tell everybody he's Spider-Man and his secret identity is now bogus, right? Like, I have the most exclusive, this guy just did this whole video talking that he's Spider-Man. And now I got freaking, I got a video. I did a TikTok thing. I did a live stream of him saying this. Gotcha, Spider-Man. Gotcha. With everybody and their brother who ends up doing these videos anyways, you would have thought it would have been the time where any time where a character would have just broken down and said that there were so-and-so person, like, hey man, video. I got you. Pushing on. So Peter, who now is just to transition to make his way to Dr. Octavius's experiment, with the what was the tritium? Supposedly there's only 25 pounds of it on the Earth, and Harry was the only one who had some little trickle of it, and Harry was like, glad to pay the pills, or glad to pay the bills, Otto. So they put this experiment together. Octavius is to mention how he is to have these arms like surgically attached to his spine, and how there's like this inhibitor chip that is to prevent the arms from trying to whisper sweet nothings into his brain to confuse him or to manipulate him or to try to control him to do any number of things, where Doc Ock can go and control them instead. So Octavius is to put this whole experiment together, turn it all on, have the power of the sun at the palm of his hands. We also had the joke where Dr. Octavius was to mention about, hey guys, like, is anybody missing like a wad of $20 in rubber band? Well, we found the rubber band. Goofy joke. So while this experiment is going on, we have some old man just come out of the background who's to tell Harry, like, whispering sweet nothings into his ear. It's like, this is something greater than anything that your father has ever done, kind of thing. And Harry's like, thank you. And you. Because my dad did all kinds of He's coming back at the end of this movie to take you out. Because you said some about my dad. That he never did anything really and truly great. He killed a lot of people, though. He killed a lot of people. So you might be next. Because Ghost Dad at the end of this. Anyways, Octavius is to put this experiment together and to just kind of like mention how grand everything is. All of a sudden, we start seeing like paper clips starting to move, light fixtures are starting to shift. All of a sudden, like things are starting to bend and whatever. All of a sudden, people are starting to freak out, and Otto is just like, "Hey, like everything's fine. Like it's just a little blip. Like it'll be fine." Blip. Funny, right? Uh, it'll soon stabilize. Everything is good. Uh, so this thing just continues to go on and on. Uh, Harry is to mention, like yelling and screaming all this stuff. Uh, Peter is to eventually run off to change into Spider-Man. Harry is to almost get clobbered by something, and Spider-Man jumps into the fray to save Harry, and Harry's like, "This doesn't make us even." And then Harry should have been like, "See you later, chump." You gonna cry, little goblin? I'm gonna start dancing around. We shall tango again. We shall tango. Peter is to, as Spider-Man, go off to look for the off switch. Dr. Octavius is asking, "Hey, Spider-Man, what are you doing?" And Peter is just like, "Dude, I'm gonna shut this down." Peter is to just toss a lot of cloggles and stuff, but Octavius is, while trying to focus on Peter and not this, like the tritium that is expanded. Ock is to be hit with this one beam of this tritium that is to just kind of take him down and kill the inhibitor chip, but you just kind of just knock him out. So Spider-Man scrambles to take a bunch of cords, rip them out, and power is off, leaving Harry to just be just like, "Oh my god, like I like that was my last ditch effort to like be great. Like this was my last." Like he put all of his money and all of his effort into Ock, and now he's just at drawing board square one again, which is just sad. So that leads us to I'm trying to perfectly like tie everything here. Doc Ock goes to the hospital to supposedly have the doctor mention like, "Anybody in shop class?" Because we're gonna like try to do an appendectomy or whatever, and like we're just gonna try to soft these robotic arms and just try to do that. But like there's so much about this movie that breaks down as like a horror movie, but also like a superhero film. It's kind of really interesting, that like perfect balance of horror and superhero. It's really fun. And so these doctors are starting to go to work, and Octavius is to all of a sudden slightly have his arms start to shift and move. The doctors don't think anything of it, but they're like, "Did that move?" Yeah. And so all of a sudden the arms live a life of their own, and they're just tossing everybody around. Uh, Octavius is to eventually wake up, removing this bandage from his eyes, and to just kind of scream in anger and agony because nothing really worked. Rosalie died in that whole experiment, and basically he is just left with like arms upon his body because these things are starting to whisper sweet nothings to him, and he's like, wait a minute, like how is it that these things are talking to me? What about the inhibitor chip? He goes to check on the back of his neck to realize, it's gone. forcing uh Forcing Doc Ock, let's just call him Doc Ock for the rest of this, it's shorter. Doc Ock is wanting to do the experiment again because he couldn't have miscalculated. Peter was, Doc Ock was thinking Peter was right. But he's like, no, I couldn't have miscalculated. Like, I just want to do the experiment again, and I think it'll work the second time around. But we need money. All of a sudden, whispering sweet nothings to, like, steal it. Like, that's a crime. We can't do that. I'm like, oh, well, the crime would be not to finish our experiment. So, yeah, let's go and just steal. Let's go to all the banks and just steal everything. I don't know how we're going to get out of there with all this money, but frickin' let's go ahead and do it. Transition us to having Peter making his way to his apartment complex, where the door of Mr. Dickovich is to open. Mr. Dickovich is to ask Peter, it's like, rent? Harry, or why do I want to say Harry all the time? I want to say like Harry Potter. I don't know why. Anyways, Peter is to mention that he's like, well, hey, like I'm a little behind, but I'll make the payment. Dickovich is like, I'm sorry, Peter. Like I can't pay my rent in promises. Like if people were to make promises to my daughter Ursula, and like then she would become like this, like, oh god, what was the line delivery? If promises were cake, like my daughter would be fat, like something like that. It was some weird delivery of a line. Dickovich is to mention that his he has the nose of a god, like a nose of a cat and eyes of the rodent, or some weird goofy line delivery. So Peter goes in and is to go and rest, to eventually wake up the next day to try to go to the restroom, and Dickovich is like, rent, and so Peter just closes the door. It's like, Dickovich is like, don't dodge me, Peter. Like, I will get you. To the point where Dickovich at one point is chasing after Peter, yelling rent, and Peter, of course, doesn't have it, and so Dickovich is to just like, well, I just can't get the money out of him today. Uh, so that transitions us to, I think this is a scene where I think Peter is to try to go with Mary or Aunt May to try to get a bank loan to try and stall the whole foreclosure thing. So they both go to this bank, and Joe McHale, who is this guy behind this counter, is to just mention to them, it's like, dude, you have like no equity, you have no nothing to like give us collateral for this whole thing. Like, there's no way that we're gonna give you this loan. And Aunt May is like, well, like then we could still probably just get this toaster, right? And Joel McHale is just like, well, that's only with a deposit of like 300 or more. And Aunt May is just like, oh, okay. So yeah, they get jack crap nothing out of this whole thing. But while that is to happen, all of a sudden Doc Ock is to make his way into this bank and to, of course, have like Joe McHale and Aunt May kind of having to go off to the side, and Aunt May is telling Peter, it's like, Peter, like, protect me. As Peter just runs off. Joel McHale's like, wow, what a son that you have there. Peter changes into Spider-Man, tries to go after Doc Ock, but that just leads to have Doc Ock grab Aunt May to use as a technically shield or negotiation tactic, because Doc Ock can't get this money from this bank because Spider-Man is to just grab and fling this money at Doc Ock to just uh, kind of get Doc to just like lose all this money, drop all this money, or just to not be able to make this heist because of Spider-Man. So, but we get this really cool spot where like Ock and Spider-Man are just kind of like fighting throughout this whole city, and Doc Ock is to be grabbing onto this building. Uh, there's to be some woman that is to look out this window, and then she's like, ah! Just scared of Dr. Octavius. Dr. Octavius makes it to the top of this building, and like Spider-Man is to try to get Aunt May away from Dr. Octavius, but he ends up trying to do this like slingshot maneuver to quickly have him like fly at Doc Ock so that way he can try to do something quickly. Dr. Octavius is to try to use his one of his tentacles as a kind of like sword or knife, but that just leads Aunt May to smack him with his umbrella, having Aunt May drop and grab to one piece of this statue where she is thinking that she's going to fall, but she ends up realizing that there is this one little step there that she can just like rest on, and she's like, oh thank God, like I'm not gonna fall to my death, thank goodness. But eventually that just leads to have Spider-Man go and get out May and swing her to safety, dropping her down. Peter mentions like, hey, like you and me kind of took Doc Ock out, and she's like, you and me, and Spider-Man's like, oh. And so he ends up going off. So uh and I want to try to get everything perfectly lined up here. Yeah. Because there's a lot of fight sequences. There's always this like big battle in this movie. But again, transition us to one having Peter, who is to go to the Daily Bugle. J. Jonah Jameson is to mention that one of his photographers is sick, so he ends up going like, "Hey, Peter, like, since you're here, like, how about you come to this like party thrown for my son, the astronaut, because you're gonna be like my photographer." And Peter is gonna do an awful job at that, where J. Jonah Jameson the whole entire time is like, "Hey, Parker, take the picture." Like, hey, take the picture. Like, me and the judge's wife or girlfriend, or like, take the picture of it. Like, where, so like Peter is just doing an awful job, and I'm sure J. Jonah is just like, I'll fire that kid. Uh, so Peter is to go to this party, and of course he is to cause a scene with Harry. Harry is to be drunk, and he's still in that mode of just like, God, like I lost everything, and like all I have left is just Spider-Man. And we have the spot where Harry is to look on newspaper clippings of Spider-Man, and Bernard is to mention like, your father only obsessed about his work. And Harry's like, shut the up, Bernard. You're fired. You're fired. Well, I can't fire you because like you're the only butler that would probably tolerate me. So like you're rehired again, but like you're on secret probation, Bernard. Uh, you, Bernard. uh, so Peter is to desperately try to get some kind of treat from this party, but every single time he's to try to grab something, the last one is to be taken, or he ends up trying to grab a drink and it's empty. So now we have this party eventually kicking off. We absurdly have this one woman who is to describe J. Jonah Jameson Jr. to us. And there's this always this one thing that just ingrains in this noggin in my head of mine is this one woman, and that is the reason why I've done this intro forever now, is we just have this woman that ends up calling J. Jonah Jameson Jr. delicious. Just like, why would you describe somebody as that? But also, it sounds hilarious to describe somebody as that. But I guess it would all depend on like eventually meeting that person somewhere down the line and them saying like, "You called me delicious once." You called me delicious. How could you? How dare you call me delicious? But yeah, like freaking J. Jonah Jameson Jr. gets freaking called delicious. So like, why can't I just call people delicious? Weirdly, oddly, yeah. So J. Jonas Jameson comes up there. Like the announcer also says that he was the first ever guy to throw a football on the moon or play football on the moon. Good for him. J. Jonah Jr. goes up there, does his whole speech. And we also had that one spot where, like, God, do we even like? I'm kind of think no, we don't get this Spider-Man No More spot just quite yet. But I think also Mary Jane was to tell Harry that she's seeing someone, and I think she kind of asks how like Peter kind of feels about it, and he's like, "Well, good for you," and it's like, really, is it? Is it good for me, Peter? Like, is it good enough for me, Peter? Like, is there somebody else that wants to step into the fray and mention that they're good enough for me? Anyways, uh, so what happens during this whole party is J. Jonah Jameson Jr. is to propose to Mary Jane. She is to say yes, and Peter even more is just like, God, like like why did this have to be the one time that I have to be there for something and this happens? Like, come on. Like, so Peter again is to excuse me, is to leave this party, put on his Spider-Man dukes, and he ends up, of course, again uh, trying to sling some webs and ends up falling, smacking into some parts of some buildings. And so Peter is like, "What is wrong with me?" He ends up trying to go and web crawl up to this wall, and he ends up starting to slip and fall. And like, I'm just waiting for the part where he's to just like, "Oh, my back, my back." Cause I'm back. Oh, my back. I'm back. My back. Freaking hilarious. That was an unplanned joke. So Peter is to just go to this normal doctor, and so the doctor is just like, "Well, you seem fine. Like, maybe like this isn't something actually wrong with you. Maybe it's just in your head." So the doctor is like, "What's up, Pete?" Like, as if I give a like, normally a doctor would just be like, "Hey, man, like, I couldn't find anything wrong with you. See you later. Like, I'm outie 5,000." Like, no, this doctor is just like really just, well, maybe it's something like mentally that like maybe there's some time that I should really just like sit next to you and just try to figure things out as if I really care. Like, how like rare would it be that like a lot of like a lot of doctors is just like, "Hey, like I couldn't find anything, like it's a viral thing, see you later." Like, that's what it would be in real deal life. Like, no one would try to think like no one would try to want to go into like mental faculties of things because that's not their area, and plus also they have so many other appointments. So that's my joke of where I'm going with this. Not that I'm saying that like, oh, doctors don't care. No, they care. It's just the fact of like they wouldn't take the time to just like Rubik's cube a man's mind to like try to. So but Peter is to go to this doctor, and it's like, well, in my dream, I'm Spider Man, and I'm having trouble swinging, and I try to climb these or crawl these walls, and I'm falling, and so and so the doctor is just like, well, maybe it's ED. Maybe you should go and take a blue pill. No, so the doctor is to just be like, well, maybe like this is a real time for you to decide to do something different with your life. Maybe you shouldn't be going and crawling on these walls. Maybe you shouldn't be going and web slinging. Like, you always have a choice, Peter. Like, I was just waiting for like the Wolverine Origins thing uh where Tobey Maguire was to be like, well, like mine got taken. We always have a choice, son. Well, mine got taken. Bullsh. Try on my son's coat. try on my doctor lab coat. So I'm having some laughs. I don't know why. I apologize. So, and man, I've gotten over an hour with this video. Oh my god. I knew that was going to probably happen anyways, but still. So, Peter is now having really this conundrum of just like sleeping on it, and he's just like, you know what? Like, I think I'm done. Like, I think like this is a time for me to just be like, you know what? Spider-Man no more. Peter is having this dream with Uncle Ben where Uncle Ben is like, you know what, like a lot of the thoughts you've been having lately, Peter, like I'm kind of concerned. Like, remember all the things that I taught you. With great power comes great responsibility. And like Peter is just like, well, yeah, but like I want a life of my own. And So Uncle Ben is like, Peter, like, take my hand. Go ahead and just go ahead and just give me one of those hands. Peter is just like, no. So that's when he just decides, like, you know what? Like, I'm gonna go and throw my costume in the trash, and I'm gonna go to class and do really well. I'm gonna just decide to whenever anybody's getting beat up in a dark alley to just turn my head and go elsewhere. Raindrops are falling on my head, but like nothing's worrying me. I'm gonna go ahead and do whatever I want. Things are going great. Uh, and Peter is to show up at the show up at Mary Jane's play and just be like, ha, like, I'm creepy, ha. And so Mary Jane is to see Peter and just be like, oh my god, he's actually here. While the one guy is to deliver this line of just like, well, I have been rather naughty. like, and so we have the guy in the background that's like, I am glad. And so this guy is like, well, are you glad to hear it? And Mary Jane is like, I am glad to hear it. So it's like, well, I have been rather naughty. So Mary Jane is all of a sudden to talk to Peter. Mary Jane is like, well, why didn't you tell me that you were coming? And Peter was like, well, I would have naturally assumed that you would have said to, like, not have me come. So Mary Jane and Peter are just kind of talking about, like, maybe this is going to be the start of them, like, picking up where they left off. Because Mary Jane had told Peter that she loved him once, and so Peter is to just be like, well, like, I'm not just an empty seat anymore. Like, I'm here. Like, I press my pants, I do my homework, I actually do my homework, and I'm here. Like, let's pick up where we left off. And Mary Jane is like, well, we can't pick anything up when we never, like, got on, kind of thing. So, like, this is just not going to, like, you can't just jump into my life whenever you want. And so, but eventually Mary Jane's last thing was to look at Peter, and she was like, yeah, you are different. Plus, she was also rethinking about that whole kiss from the end of Spider-Man 1 to just be like, Because Mary Jane goes and is to look at J. Jonah Jameson Jr. and have them kind of talk about some wedding stuff, some invitations. So Mary Jane ends up kissing J. Jonah Jameson Jr. in the same exact way that she ended up kissing Spider-Man. J. Jonah Jameson Jr. is like, well, like, I feel like I'm on the moon. Will you have dinner with me? And Mary Jane is like, no, because you don't feel like Spider-Man. I want a divorce. Oh, wait, we're not married. I want a separation. Oh, wait, like, that doesn't really matter. I just want to just leave. So, like, there's an extended cut of this movie, and like, there's one part where this garbage man is to get the Spider-Man costume and bring it to J. Jonah Jameson. And J. Jonah is like, oh my god, like, he threw in the towel. I got to him. Freedom of the press and all that. So, the extra extended scene is at one point to have J. Jonah put on the Spider-Man costume and just, like, web up supposedly the spot, but, like, he was pretending to be Spider-Man weirdly for some reason. That was such a fun scene, and I wish it could have made the normal cut of things, because I think people would have had a good laugh at that, but it's good to see it in the extended cut. Uh, So, uh, so the next thing is to lead us. Like I was trying to think of what the next thing was. So Doc Ock, of course, wants to go and get more tritium, and there's only one place to get it, and that, of course, is Harry Osborn. Harry Osborn is, of course, like just taking a drink over by his balcony. So we have this kind of crashing sound. Harry's like, "What the heck is that? Let me go and check, like aside this balcony to see what the heck this is." All of a sudden, when one of Doc Ock's tentacles grab Harry, and all of a sudden Harry's drink goes flying. Doc Ock catches it and is to drink it. I kind of love the blooper reel of this movie because we have spots where Octavius is to try to drink it from the thing, but he keeps missing. And there's this one spot where he's just like, "Oh no, I'm driving tonight." Freaking awesome. Uh, so we have the making of a deal. Ock is to ask Harry, like, how am I going to get some more of that sweet tritium? Harry's to say, well, give me Spider-Man, and Ock is just like, well, how can I find Spider-Man? Harry is to mention, it's like, well, Peter is to take pictures of him, so you'll probably find Spider-Man by getting to him. And so Doc Ock is just like, well, get it ready, get the tritium ready, and I'm gonna be freaking bouncing out of here. Uh so Peter is still having this back and forth conundrum of like, should I be like should I still be like Spider-Man? Like, should I like what about what I need? What about what I want? Because Peter is to go into this burning building. It seems like every single like the first Spider-Man movie, burning building. Spider-Man 2, burning building. So Peter goes and runs into this burning building to go and get this little child, this little child, has some difficulties making his way through this place. I think there's a whole thing that like falls, like a floor falls underneath him, and so he's just kind of hanging on. This little kid has to try to pull Peter up because like Peter doesn't have the full Spider-Man strength, I guess, within him. Peter goes, gets a child, brings it to the parents, and Peter has an oxygen tank mask on, and because social distance, and the firefighters are just like, yeah, some poor soul got trapped on the whatever floor. Like, yeah, that sucks that one person died. Like, man, if Spider Man would have been here, like, man, like, I'm sure, like, everyone would have been saved, right? Guy randomly who saved person, like, right? As he's poking Peter Parker repetitiously to just want him to be Spider Man again. uh, like we also find out in the news that crime has gone up substantially. I think 75%. Anyways, Peter is to make his way to Aunt May's. Aunt May is to just be like, well, like I only have I do have a certain amount of time left, but you know what? Like I'm just gonna call it. Like I'm just gonna go and find my next place to live. They're going to sell this whole thing off. John Henry is to help me move things, and I'm giving him $5. And Peter Parker's like, "That's John Henry. Like, I hope he's going to be in the in No Way Home as a much older kid for a reference that we cannot really understand. Like, who's this one kid? It's going to be like Endgame all over again, where people aren't going to remember the one kid from Iron Man 3 that was to be in the funeral of Tony Stark. And people are like, who is that one kid? Oh, that must be Iron Man 3 kid. Sure. And so Aunt May is to tell Peter, it's like, yeah, like John Henry, like, guess who he wants to be when he grows up? Spider-Man. So Aunt May is to eventually tell Peter, it's like, well, and you kind of every single time you watch this part, you just get goosebumps just because of Aunt May like talking about this story, because a lot of us who are fans of Spider-Man like have really this whole thing where like a lot of us would all want to go to the theater to have like like this moment where it grips us, where like Spider-Man is telling like his damsel of distress, or like these random people that he's trying to save, just hold on one more minute longer or 1 second longer. And like you just get goosebumps from this speech that Aunt May's deliver about how like having Spider-Man in our life makes us noble, uh, and like makes us really invest in a person that is to tell people like hold on for one more second. And like this speech is just like, oh my god, it's just so, it's such a beautiful thing, but it's also to inspire Peter to realize like, you know what, I think I have to be Spider-Man again, like, because Aunt May is to tell Peter, it's like to to really focus on what he really and truly wants, or something around that way. So Peter is to go off and of course go and just like focus and just try to just try to do this. So Peter starts booking it, starts running, and he's like, I'm back, I'm back. And then all of a sudden he's like, yeah, the jump wasn't high enough. All of a sudden he goes falling, and he's like, ah, and he starts grabbing onto one like clothing line, and he ends up swinging and smacking into some car. And then we get the part where he's like, oh, my back, my back. And then you just see him just kind of like hobbling, like kind of walking like through this one spot. Like, hey man, I've freaking been there, where all of a sudden like I I lift some like heavy object, and then all of a sudden like I just hear this popping, and I'm like, oh crap. This is gonna be this would be a fun work day. Yeah, because all of a sudden you're just like walking like you're hunched over for like the rest of the freaking day. When I was to do that kind of stuff, boo hoo for me, right? But anyways, pushing on. Uh, so and I think I'm missing a bunch of little details about this movie. Like, there's probably some parts here where I'm kind of just like, oh yeah, I probably should have mentioned. I probably should have mentioned about this little detailish part. Sorry about the reset there. I just wanted to just like not have to like reset again in a video. So Peter is to finally meet up with MJ. And now here's, of course, the scene where MJ is just like, well, you know what? When you were talking before, I did want to listen to you. Like, my brain was playing tricks, but now I think that because I think that you're Spider-Man, that, you know what, maybe we should give this whole relationship thing a go. And Peter is like, well, that's great and all, but you know what? My mind was playing tricks too. And so Mary Jane is like, well, you know what? Like, just freaking kiss me. Like, kiss me, and then, like, I need to figure something out. So we need to just do some lip locking, mother. We need to do some of them lip smacking good times. All of a sudden, Peter is to have spider senses that are to be happening here. Peter goes and is to grab Mary Jane and do this spin maneuver to prevent them from uh, dying from this car being chucked into this restaurant. Doc Ock makes it in the restaurant and is to see Peter and to be like, well, hey, like, I'm gonna go and grab Mary Jane, and there's nothing you can do about it, Peter. Give me Spider-Man, whatever freaking location that he's supposed to be in. When, like, I don't think they actually haggle over where that they're supposed to be. But I guess that's just me. I guess it's just like, hey, wait for Doc Ock to show up in any part of town. Like, did they talk about addresses or whatever? Like, I don't know. Uh, Peter is the threat, and if you hurt her, it's like, and Doc Ock is like, say what now? You're gonna say what to me now? Like, I will peel the flesh off of her bones. Like, don't even try it, Peter. Like, just because me and you had like a talk once, and I talked about poetry, which maybe isn't the most masculine thing to talk about. But you know what? Like, I could still take a man down. Anyways, so Peter, of course, is to now have to rush to go into his Spider-Man attire. And so now Peter is to make his way to now having to fight with Doc Ock. But this all just leads to this big, huge subway scene, which is the most iconic scene of this entire film. Of course, where Peter is to just be like webbing all over the gosh darn place and just like connecting all the lines, and he's like, "Arr!" And he has this like goofy looking face, but he's just like, "Arr!" And like he's holding the subway, he's like, "Arr!" And like this is like the biggest freaking like scene of this freaking franchise, him doing this whole subway thing where every single Spider-Man movie had to desperately try to mimic that one maneuver for the rest of their lives. So Doc Ock goes under the subway trying to fight Spider-Man. Like, there's this one cool moment where Peter is to be like going and flying through a part of this bridge in this little small like piece, and he's just kind of squeezing his body into this one false like small spot to like fling through. But yeah, so Peter is like webbing up like the cars and the buildings to just try to like make it to this subway and figure out a way to just like strategically get back onto the subway. So Doc Ock is grabbing people with his tentacles to fling them up in the air. Peter is webbing them to just try and make sure they all have a safe landing and don't die. Doc Ock goes and breaks off the brake part of this to just speed it up to the max speed, and then break off the brake. And then Doc Ock tells Spider-Man, it's like, well, it looks like you have a plane or you have a train to catch. Doc Ock runs off to go and and do his experiment, and or no, to go off and no, to do his experiment of coming back to grab Peter because he still needs Peter. Harry goes, webs up buildings, and tries to like hold on. It's like his face just looks, but like man, just the strength of all that, and just the impressive maneuver that is to go on here, and it just looks so freaking cool. Like the whole like Spider-Man is just holding this subway off, just looks awesome. I wonder if they're going to try to mimic that in No Way Home, because there is a technical like subway train system in that movie for some weird reason. Anyways, where are we? So Peter is to be so exhausted after trying to stop this train, he ended up like putting his foot in in the track, trying to like have this kind of slowed down, but it just kept like hitting against his leg, to eventually where he's like, man, my freaking leg. And they're like, hey, do you got another plan? And that's when he just starts like webbing up like crazy, like a crazy man. But then he ends up like falling over. People like grab onto him before he like actually like falls. Spider-Man ended up getting got his like mask on fire, so he ends up taking it off. So they grab Spider-Man and kind of just haul him into the subway, and everybody is just like talking about like, man, he's so young. He looks like the age of my son. And like everybody's talking about like that guy looks like Tobey Maguire. Yeah, that guy from the movie The Details. No, that was a movie he did way later in his career. I think that was like the last movie he really did. Uh, Interestingly enough, he ended up doing that movie with, I think, Miss Brandt, or Miss Grant, the the girl that's J. Jonah Jameson's assistant. I think it's Brandt. Moving on. So Spider-Man is to, of course, get up and realize, like, oh, I don't have my mask on, and everybody's looking at me. Everyone can see who I am, and it's like, so wait a minute. So in No Way Home, is all those people not going to know that Peter Parker is technically Spider-Man, because that whole scene is just going to have to get retconned because of Doctor Strange's spell? The subway people won't know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. We retconned that. Because evidently, whoever is the Peter in No Way Home is to basically just be any Peter, which that's what I'm naturally assuming that's going on in No Way Home. Uh, so there's two kids that end up giving Spider-Man his mask, and they're like, "Hey, glad to have you back, Spider-Man." So, what happens next here? Oh, Spider-Man gets up because Doc Ock is to, uh, like, push this whole, like, subway, like, section just completely open where he can just kind of, like, go and get at Peter. Interestingly enough, at that spot, uh, Doc, the guy that played Doc Ock, was to mention that they did that spot for real, and Doc Ock was actually like freaking out about that scene because he wasn't sure how that was gonna come out. So, and like Sam Raimi was just like, "Hey man, like you do realize that we have to try to like make sense of what the heck that you did there." And the guy was just like, "Hey man, I was scared of that whole scene. Like I wasn't ready for it." And it's like, "Well, we'll fix it in post. We'll do something. We'll try to double it and try to figure it out like how we should react to that whole scene." Uh, but yeah, so Spider-Man gets up, and then everybody ends up going to the subway to just be like, you know what, like you're not like a subway or light rail, like or one of these all the same. I don't know. So all these people just get in front of Doc Ock, just be like, hey man, if you're gonna come through and try to get to him, you're gonna have to come through all of us. And like, me too, me too. And so every like, it's the bridge scene all over again, where it's like, hey, you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us, because we're New Yorkers, and you know, we're gonna do this. So everybody just gets in front of Doc Ock, and Doc Ock is like, great, because I'll just use my tentacles and freaking push all of you and still get to Spider-Man regardless. Hit him with my tentacles so he ends up falling back. I'll barb wire his body to make my way to Harry's and drop off Spider-Man's body at Harry's so I can get my tritium and get the heck out of there. Harry is just like, yeah, like, I'm going to kill the man that killed my father. Harry gets his sword out, which is like, why do you just keep is that your, paper opener that you have there, buddy? He just has, like, swords just lying around just for any occasion, where he's just like, hey, man, like, I just have, like, 20 swords just at the ready. Going to the bathroom, there's a sword in there, or a dagger, or a knife, whichever. Like, he just has swords and knives and daggers everywhere in his home. Like, he's gonna go into the shed of his, like, oh, well, I guess this is a huge apartment complex. He's gonna go into the kitchen, and there's not going to be like normal kitchen knives. There's just going to be like 20 swords that are all just lined up in one section, one spot. So that was a joke that went on too long. So Harry is to get the knife ready. All of a sudden, Spider-Man is to wake up when Harry unmasks Spider-Man to find out that it's Peter. And Harry's like, no, my best friend. Peter wakes up and is to easily just break this barbed wire. And Peter is to ask Harry, like, hey, like, I need to figure out where Doc Ock is. He has MJ. Like, he's gonna build a machine again. Like, he's gonna destroy the world. And Harry's like, Peter, you killed my father. And Peter is just like, well, there's bigger things going on here than you and me. So give me that sweet address. So that transitions us to Doc Ock's lair, where, of course, Mary Jane is bizarrely wet for some reason for the second time in this franchise, because we had a spot before where Mary Jane was to be having Spider-Man battling a bunch of thugs and kiss afterwards. And now she's bizarrely wet again for some reason, where Mary Jane is now saying, like, hey, you got what you needed from your science experiment, now let me go. And Doc Ock is just like, I'm not going to let you go. You just call the police. Not that anyone cares, because Spider-Man is dead. And Mary Jane's like, Spider-Man isn't dead. Doc Ock is like, yeah, Spider-Man's dead. Or if he's not, he will be when he comes here. So Spider-Man is to do a very thing called dumb thing. Spider-Man is to make his way to Doc Ock's lair, and he doesn't go right to Doc Ock. Oh no, why would he do that? He just kind of sneaks and tries to get to Mary Jane, and is to tell her, like, hey, once you get free, try to get out of here. And all of a sudden we just have, like, Doc Ock, who is to go and try to attack Peter. And Doc Ock is like, I knew Osborn wouldn't have the stones to finish you off. So now we have this fight between Spider-Man and Doctor Ock or Doc Ock, and all the while, like experiment is getting basically turned on to, starting the whole machine again. Like Peter was to be concerned about. So eventually, Mary Jane is to eventually get free. She's kind of just holding on with one little piece. Uh, Peter is eventually web Mary Jane to like grab her and like get her back to safety. But like Spider Man is having like a hard time just freaking uh, dealing with this Spider Man or whereas Spider Man was having a hard time dealing with Doctor Ock. I was like, what were the words that I was trying to say here? And like Spider Man gets pretty easily taken down. Like there was also this extended cut, I think, of a battle on the subway where Spider-Man was to have his like head crushed almost by Doc Ock having these two like tentacles upon Harry Peter Park or Spider-Man's head and almost trying to crush him. Like there's a whole huge extended battle on the subway, which I think was a really cool fight out. Like that was a really cool extended cut. If you've never seen the extended cut of Spider-Man 2, go ahead and figure out a way to finally say that you saw the extended cut of this, uh, because it's really good. So all of a sudden, Mary Jane is to grab this piece of wood because she's like, well, if Spider Man is having some tough times, maybe I'll go and help him out. Like, Mary Jane is just like more like courage than sense, but she's just like, no, like, how many times has Spider Man saved my bacon? Spider Ham. Uh, Mary Jane goes in with this piece of wood, tries to swing at Doc Ock. Doc Ock just bats her away. And so now Doc Ock is like, well, how are you going to scurry out of this? Uh, Peter goes and webs the cords, brings them up to have Doc Ock get electrocuted. He ends up getting like flung from where he was, and so Peter is to try and like disconnect this whole machine like he tried before, ripping out all the electrical cords and trying to shut this whole thing out again, but it's not working. So Peter now has to come to Doc Ock to help him try to take this machine down. And Peter is to take off his mask to talk to Doc Ock and say like hey, like you told me once that like power or something was to use for the good of mankind, that it's a privilege, or genius, I think was it was something around those words. God, knowledge was to be used for the good of mankind. It's a privilege, and that sometimes we have to give up the things we want the most, even our dreams, to uh, and like that's what like eventually Peter gets kind of hit with Aunt May. Oh, there was also this spot where Peter was to tell Aunt May about the thing that happened with Uncle Ben, that Peter was there when Uncle Ben was to die. He held his hand. Peter went off to try to go and take down the robber that was to take down Uncle Ben. And Peter tells Aunt May all this, which leads her to be in this room with him. And then after hearing all this, she ends up walking off to go and cry in a room. When Peter's to make his way back, that is the whole spot when uh, Aunt May is to try to move out of her home. So Doc Ock is to just be like, well, like, okay, I think I'll do this now. I think, like, I'm gonna force my tentacles to listen to me now, because this whole thing is actually just self-sustaining, and there's no easy way to take this thing down. But uh, Doc Ock has this plan to like put in the river that they need to drown it, and that'll be the nullifying thing to take this thing down. So Doc Ock goes to his thing and starts pulling it apart, taking it down, mentioning that he will not die a monster. Like as if he's going to really die in this movie because some other movie will tell you he's not dead. Maybe. No. Don't think so. But while that is to go on, all of a sudden, Peter is just to turn, and Mary Jane is to be like, ha, like you're, and that's why, and ha. And Peter is like, oh crap, I forgot you were here, woman that I want in the future to love. I completely forgot you were even here. Yeah, like so I'm Spider-Man. Is that cool? Is that cool that I'm Spider-Man? So all of a sudden, like the building is starting to like come into itself. We had this really cool spot where all of a sudden Peter is to take this one wall because it's kind of almost coming down, crushing both of them. And like we have this awkward moment between Peter and Mary Jane where Peter is just like, hey, hi. This is really heavy. And Mary Jane's like, yeah, I'm sure it is. But Peter like picks it up and then just flings it. And then there's another thing to like come at them. So like Peter just grabs Mary Jane and just like swings off. So now we have this moment where Peter is to have this big massive web and is to like stick onto it with Mary Jane. And Mary Jane is just like, you know what? I think I always kind of knew. And Peter was like, well, you know why? Like I couldn't tell you because if any of my enemies ever knew, like I couldn't protect you and blah blah. So, because Peter is like, because I'll always be Spider-Man, and so that just leads eventually Peter to just take Mary Jane and have her to just be like put off to this one side where she is to be able to walk off because the police are there. J. Jonah Jameson Jr. is there to like hug her, and so Peter is to put on his mask and to swing off. Oh my god, this is almost 2 hours. So Peter is to make his way back to his apartment complex. Mary Jane is supposedly to have to get married, but she ends up running off from getting married to make her way to Peter's. We also get this spot where Harry is to, of course, lose his freaking mind. All of a sudden, hearing the cackle of the Green Goblin of Pryor, which is his father. All of a sudden, Harry is to see the Green Goblin in the mirror. like, Harry, like, now you know the truth about Peter, and now you can avenge me. And Harry's like, no, and Norman is like, avenge me. And so Harry is to go and chuck this knife at this mirror, breaking the mirror. But then he ends up finding out that all the Green Goblin's gear was behind this mirror this whole time. And he's like, okay, like, I guess I will take on the Green Goblin mantle. So Mary Jane escapes her wedding to knock on Peter's door to basically just tell him, like, hey, I've always been waiting at your door. So, now, like, we should like be a couple. We should like, in the sequel, we better be married, or we better get some married going on. You better have a ring soon, Peter. Because I freaking ran away from my wedding to see you. And, like, Mary Jane has this nice moment where she's to mention that, like, can't somebody, like, save you for once instead of vice versa? So, Peter is to, of course, give in to Mary Jane, just be like, okay, like, we'll try this, we'll do this. Uh, but yeah, like, that's really all this is to just line up to be, because Harry's to get the heads up that he needs to go out to try and be Spider-Man yet again. And so, of course, Mary Jane is like, well, go get him, Tiger. So Spider-Man gets his suit on, runs out, and does, of course, his usual finale of a scene where he is to swing around and then, as per usual, like, stop in this one spot for credits to eventually start rolling. So yeah, fun movie. I'm gonna get the heck out of here. I apologize for how long this is, but, like, I guess I just wanted to get every little detail of this movie out of there. Plus, this is gonna be a hard thing to review anyways, because there's so many little details, so many little things. I'm sure there was parts that I missed or skipped or whatever. Um, but yeah, like, there was also the one spot where J. Jonah Jameson was just like, when Peter was to steal the Spider-Man costume back, because J. Jonah was just like, well, like, hey, we need Spider-Man, but, like, he gave up, like. And so J. Jonah is starting to feel bad about, like, he forced Peter to retire, but then all of a sudden the costume ends up getting snatched, and then J. Jonah was like, he's a thief. I want Spider-Man. Like, I forgot about that one moment. So with that said, I'm gonna get out of here because I want Spider-Man. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.